Hello everyone and welcome back to, I was going to say a tutorial, but it's not necessarily a tutorial. We're just going to be building something, basically like an API starter template for Node.js. I don't really use Node.js that much anymore. I used it for about 5 years on basically every side project I worked on. I stopped using it, and then recently at work, I was asked, well, we basically made the decision to go with Node.js as like our main thing to use for, making APIs and stuff. And I was asked to create a kind of template that we could use. So this is basically that. I'm just kind of recreating it for kind of personal use, I suppose. So hopefully you can learn something from it. The idea of this video is really to use it as a reference. So if I build something further down the line that needs kind of an API that's going to be fairly simple, then I'll use this. I mean, it can be used for complex APIs as well, like large APIs, but I think I may use other things for that. Like I do, PHP is my go-to language, so if I needed to build something big, I'd probably just go with that because that's what I'm most comfortable with. But this will work. You can adapt it for small APIs and large APIs, so that's fine. But yeah, in the future, if I just want to quickly get an API up and running, this will be what I use. And I also would probably refer people back to this video. If I used an API and I didn't, say exactly what I was using, I'd just be like, right, this is the video I made about creating this API starter. Go watch that and then come back to this video and you'll be up to speed on what we're doing. So, if that is you, welcome from the future, I guess. You'll probably need to update some of these packages that we're using, but that should be about the only change you'll need. This API or the project structure is really the key thing. So how we lay out the project is what matters. So not really the tools that we're using or the specific versions of the tools that matter. Most things will basically stay the same. If, let's say, you're watching this 2 years down the line, most things will stay the same. The structure will stay the same. Obviously, you'll need to update the packages and make any changes, if any. I don't really think there'd be many changes unless there was a package that got deprecated, in which case you might just have to use something different but similar. I'm sure you'll be able to tackle that. I've got a lot of faith in you, so don't worry about that. Well, let's get started. I've got this blank project here, just API starter. I'll just get npm up and running, npm init-y, that should be fine. It'll take a bit of time. For some reason, the first time you run it, on Windows anyway, it takes a bit of time, but then if you run it again, it'll be instant, so I don't really know why that's the thing, but anyway, it doesn't really matter, it's just something I noticed. And whilst we're in the command line, we'll just install our dependencies, so we'll do npm-y. My God, I was thinking about this command again. npm-i is the command we need. And we'll get express. So I'll just copy and paste all these in. So we'll get express as our routing library. Oh, that's the wrong thing. Express. We'll go for Zod next. I'll just type this in. It's literally just, I keep doing that. It's literally just Zod. Nodemon. Oh, actually, we'll install that in a second because we're going to install that as a dev dependency. We'll get .env. So I could just type these, I'm just really bad at typing, so I'm almost certainly going to mess it up. .env. And then we're going to get cause, which is a middleware for Express, which is for, what does cause stand for again? Is it cross-origin resource sharing? Something like that. Basically, you might have noticed this if you're using a browser and trying to talk to something on a different domain. So if you've got example.com and you're trying to talk to API.com, sometimes that fails because cause doesn't let it happen because it's cross-origin, it's not the same domain, and browsers get very fussy about that, especially Chrome, for security reasons, so it's probably for a good reason, to be fair. But yeah, if we install this, we can basically make it so it doesn't do that. Obviously, because it is a security thing, I would recommend looking into it yourself. And by the way, that's all we need. So, actually, we do one more thing. We need libSQL, which is just at libsql/client. But yeah, as I was saying about cause, There are lots of options, so you can do things like you can only allow certain domains to access your API using CORS and stuff like that. CORS is basically when somebody sends a request to your API, you basically send a response saying, yes, it's okay for you to request something from our API. So that's all that CORS does. And obviously, you may not want just anybody sending requests to your API, in which case, feel free to mess around with the options. You can see, I think further down, like here, CORS options, origin, which means, I think this means that it has to come from example.com, and if it doesn't, it'll be denied, the request. So, yeah, and you can see here more options. So if you know, look into it yourself. The reason why I'm installing it is because I know that at some point I'll use this API with a browser, and it's going to come up with CORS issues, and I'm not going to care about CORS for the most part. So I'm just installing it for like ease of use, I suppose. But yeah, that's pretty much all we need to install except NodeMon. So that's going to be a dev dependency. So we can do npm i-D and then NodeMon, and we'll install that. And we need to open up this in our text editor. So we'll open this up. Hopefully this is big enough, by the way. I have actually zoomed in quite a bit, like as much as I really can zoom in, so hopefully it's easy to see. But there's a couple of additions to package.json I want to make. The first one, I'm just going to add a dev script here, so I'll do dev, and then I'll do NodeMon index.js. If you're not familiar with NodeMon, it will basically watch out for the files. So any file we add and change, it will then refresh the server. So instead of having to run node index.js, and then anytime you make a change, you have to then stop the server and then run node index.js again, NodeMon will just handle that for us, which is really convenient. The next thing I'm going to do is add a type. So we'll do type, and we'll do module, just so we can use the import and export syntax. You can use what you want. I actually quite like CommonJS, the require syntax, but yeah, it's obviously up to you. So imports as well, we're going to do some import mapping just to make it easier to import, like, let me give you an example because it's easier to see it this way. So if we do like import something from, a lot of the times we have to do .. and then something.js. It'd be nice if we didn't have to do that. So what we can do instead is do hashtag. Oh, got them all over the place here. We can do hashtag. Where is hashtag on this keyboard? It's not where it's meant to. Oh, there we go. Resource / and then something.js. So it basically uses like this as the root of the directory. So instead of having to navigate from the directory you're in, you can basically reference everything from the root directory, if that makes sense. So instead of doing .. You can do this. So we'll see that in practice, and you'll understand. It'll make a lot more sense. But we'll add the aliasing now. So the first one, so it's basically a key value. So the key in this case is the alias. So it's hashtag resource in this case, / and then star.js. So it's basically going to be any JS file. And then we do the map. So this is where it kind of makes a bit more sense. So we do / referencing the current directory that we're in now, the root directory. So from the root directory, we go / and then it's going to live in source / resources, and then we'll do star.js. So any JS file in source resources can map to #resource.js. Hopefully that makes sense. We'll add a couple more because we've got a few sort of main directories that we want to create. So we'll do middleware, and then we'll do utils and utils. So we should hopefully be able to reference these, or the JS files in these folders using these aliases, just to make it a bit easier. So the next thing I'll do is create an index.js file. So this will be our entry point. And oh look, so the first thing we need to do is import .env, just so we can get the environment variables from our .env file into our process.env. So like this, .env, and then obviously we can reference whatever we need to. The thing that I get confused about this import is whether we need the .js. I've done stuff before and it's broken without the .js, but then sometimes it doesn't seem to need it. What does it say on... which one am I looking at? .env, yeah. See, I might give that a try, actually. I might just try config and then just leave it like that and see if that works. I don't know if that'll work, but... Right, so that should work fine. The next thing we'll do is get express. So we'll do import express from express. Then we'll import cars from cars. And we'll do the kind of initial setup for express to work. We'll do const app equals express. We'll do const port equals, and then this can be equal to whatever you want, but we'll go with 8000. And then we'll do app.use cars, app.use express.json. So if we send JSON data through in a request, which is going to be like our default thing when we send a request, if we do like a post request, we'll have to send JSON data. And if we do, this will pass that data and add it to request.body. So we'll be able to access it throughout our Express application, which is good. And the last thing we can do is do app.listen. And then we're passing the port, the first argument, and then a callback, which basically we can just, I mean, you can do anything here, but we'll just log to the console and say that app listening on port. And then I forgot to do the backticks, which I need to do, but I'm using a different keyboard that's got backticks in a different place. So there we go. And we'll do port, and that should print app listening on port 8000, which we can test here. So we'll do npm run dev, and we should see it. The NodeMon is watching. You can see that it's watching the files, and it'll restart if we make a change. Oh, the files. In fact, we can do this. If we just add some gibberish in and we save, it should refresh it and show our gibberish, which is good. So that's kind of the starting point. You honestly could just get away with this. Like if you really wanted a simple API, you could just do like app get, slash, and then something like this. But I'm messing this up. Rec, res, and then you could do like res dot send. Would that be right? Hello? I think that should work. If we open up Insomnia, which is my HTTP REST client, would recommend using this. And we do HTTP localhost 8000. We should, if we send a GET request, get hello. So that is about as simple as it gets. We are going to add more to it than this, but that is simple. So if all you need is a few endpoints, then you're pretty much done, to be honest with you. But what we'll do is add some more stuff in. So first of all, I'm actually going to add a .env file. Now, you don't want to commit this, so let me just add something else just for the sake of, I think I'd be doing you a disservice if I didn't include this. But this is a .gitignore file, and we can add .env here. So basically, anything that's in this file will be ignored by Git, because most likely what you'll want to do is, if you follow along this tutorial, you'll want to push this up to Git or, GitHub, GitLab, whatever you use. And you don't really want to be pushing your .env file. So, yeah, make sure you've got a .gitignore and you add .env. And actually, as well, whilst we're here, Node modules too. You don't want to be pushing your Node modules because that's quite a big folder, and you don't want to push all that to Git. So in .env, you need a couple of things. So the first one is the database URL. Database URL. Now, we're using SQLite. So the URL in our case is actually just going to be a local file. So it's going to be file, and then we'll do local.db. The good thing about SQLite is that it works locally really easily, literally just in a file. But it also works remotely really well using Turso. So when you deploy this, you literally just have to change the database URL to be the URL of whatever Turso gives you, or if you're using something else, then use that. But it's really simple, and using the file locally is really easy as well. And the last thing is going to be the DB auth token. So if you are using Turso or something like that, you'll most likely get an auth token, which is what will allow you to actually add things into the database, access the database. So that we can leave this blank for now, but when you put this into production, you'll need this. So just bear in mind that. And then what I will do is add folder, and we'll add a source folder. So this is where all our code's actually going to go. And we're going to add 3 folders. So we're going to add resources, new folder under source. We'll do middleware, and we'll do new folder and utils. So we'll do utils first because it's the easiest one to do. So we'll add a new file and call that db.js. So utils is where all of your kind of shared things will go. So for example, in our case, we've got a database. We're going to be using this to access the database. So this will go in utils because it can be accessed, it can be used all over the place, and it doesn't really fit into resources or middleware. It's a sort of utility thing. So we'll put that in utils, and you might have, for example, if you're using a queue system like AWS SQS, you might have a utils file called sqs.js, and that's how you'd access SQS, or I don't know, you might have kafka.js or whatever it is, whatever third-party service you need to access, it would go in here. So db.js should be fairly straightforward. Literally all it is importing the create client from LibSQL. That should be fine. And then exporting it. So export const db equal to create client. And then we need to pass in basically what was in our end file. We'll do URL, and that'll be equal to process.env.database URL. And we've got the auth token too, and that'll be process.env. What did we call it? DB auth token, sorry. DB auth token. So that'll be blank for now, but obviously it doesn't really matter. And then obviously we've got the URL, which is just going to point to the local file. And what this will do, when we actually run the database, it will create local DB for us. So we don't need to create that file. It'll just create it for us, and it'll create it in like the root directory. So that should all be fine. And it's as easy as that, which is why I like SQLite, because there's literally no other setup to be done. So the next thing I'll add is, I think I'll add a resource to start with, and then kind of fill in the middleware stuff as well. So let's add the files for this. So we need, and we're doing to do, by the way, just as an example. It doesn't, obviously you can change it to be whatever you need, whatever resources you need. And these are just going to be the resources, because we're building basically a REST API. So these are going to be the resources that you basically expose to the client that's accessing the REST API. So I don't know, if you're doing an e-commerce store, you might have products, you might have customers, orders, that kind of thing. So you would put these as each of those, it would be their own folder under resources. So after that we need routes. So to do.routes.js and to do.validation.js. So that we're going to keep it like that for now. You could have like to-do.services, and basically services would be things like you might have a function in there for creating a to-do or updating a to-do. So all the business logic would live in services, and then you would do all the routing using routes and the controller. So the controller would call the service and whatever function it needed to call, and then return the value to routes, and then that would return it to the user. In our case, we're just going to keep it really simple and use controller for all the sort of business logic, but you can use a service as well if you want to. Just putting that out there, because that is what I used to do, but to be honest with you, this API is meant to be really simple. So keeping these files to a minimum, or the files you need to a minimum is kind of my main priority here. I remember I actually have a video on my main channel, which has, well, it's my most popular video, so if you need to find it, you can just search by most viewed. But it's basically what we're doing now, a Node.js API, except it's much more complicated. So, and like looking back at it, it's like I don't really need all of what I was doing in that sort of tutorial. So, yeah, this is kind of the basic version. And to be honest with you, I think this version could get you quite far without really needing to add anything to it. So, yeah, just these three files should be fine. And obviously each resource will have these 3 files. So I'm trying to think, it probably makes sense to do, I don't know if it makes sense because I need to write the validation middleware. But, well, I'll just write it because I've already written it, basically. There's something in it that kind of needs, it doesn't really need testing, but it's kind of like I'm writing it and it doesn't, well, okay, we'll just write it and then I think it'll make sense when I actually get to that part and I'll explain what I mean. But yeah, there's a part in it that seems not like magic, but it's kind of like, oh, he's written this, but I don't really get what's going on. Maybe, but we'll see. We'll see. It should be fine. So the first thing we'll do is export default function, and we'll call it validate. It might make more sense to call it validation middleware, just because that's what we're going to call it throughout the code base, but we'll call this validate and it should be fine. So we'll pass in a schema. We're doing, I believe, this is a higher order function, so it's a function that returns a function. And the reason why is because when we use this, we need to pass in a schema. So normally, when you're using Express, it expects a function with these parameters, so rec, res, and next, which obviously, that's fine. It's just, we also need to know what the schema is that we're kind of checking against. We're checking the request body against this schema. If we just did it like this, like if we did a normal middleware, we'd do this. And obviously, we can't pass in our schema. So we need to pass in the schema first on like a top level function. And then we need to return the function, and inside of this function we can use schema, so we can do all the stuff in here. So it's basically just a way, almost a hack to make it so that we can use schema, but still create a middleware effectively. So inside of this we'll do a try catch, and we'll do const validated equals schema dot parse. So Zod is what we're using for our schema validation, and it has this function on it called parse, which will just check basically whatever we input in here against the schema. So obviously this is the schema, rec.body, and if it's validated, we can do rec.body equal to validated, so it will set it to whatever's returned, and basically when Zod passes the body and tests it against the schema, it will remove anything that isn't in the schema, which is very nice. That's kind of a security thing. But it will also fail if something in the schema is not in request body, and it will throw an error, which is where this catch comes in. But it will return like a JSON object with basically what we're expecting. So all the unexpected values will be stripped out, and then everything that's in that object is what we need, so we can assign it to rec.body and then use it later in the request. Let me just add a semicolon there, and then we can call next And that should be fine, and that'll go on to the next function in the sort of chain, the express chain. So this is the part I was talking about where it's like, we can't really test this yet because we don't have an endpoint to test it against, but we are going to do something now which is going to basically, when the validation fails, it has, Zod has this errors array, which looks a bit kind of weird, but you can use that to kind of format error messages. So that's effectively what we're doing now, and it's just going to return something to the user that's a bit more useful than, just saying something's failed. So we'll do const errors, and you sort of just have to trust me that this works. I mean, we can test it in a second, but we're going to write it before we test it, which is kind of the weird thing. Like, we're going to write it a lot of time before we actually test it, which is weird. But I've already sort of done this and tested that it works, so it should be fine, unless I messed up. So e.errors, oh actually, yeah, this needs to be e, sorry. e.errors.forEach, and this will be error, and we'll do errors.push. So we'll push onto this errors array, and it's just going to be an array of strings, so it's fairly straightforward. And what we can do, we do backticks, and we'll do string interpolation, error.path, and then we'll do 0. So yeah, it has this, the path is basically the name in the schema. So for example, if we had a schema that was checking for the presence of name, then the path would be name, right? So name, and then we can do error.message. So usually the message is like something like it's required. So if it's missing, but it's required, the error message will be required. But if it's meant to be like, let's say it's meant to be a string, but we pass in an integer, something like that, the message would be something like it's meant to be a string, right? So it's basically, it'll say name and then meant to be a string, something like that, or name required. So we can just return res.status as 400 to indicate that the client has done something wrong. And we can set JSON to, and then we'll do errors. We'll just do errors like that, so that should be fine. So yeah, we'll return a response with the status code 400 with a JSON body with all the errors in it. And that should return something that the user can actually use and understand what they've done wrong. And that's, it's a fairly easy way of doing this, which is quite nice. But if it does pass, it'll set validated to, it'll set rec.body, request.body to validated, and then move on to the next function in the chain, and we'll write those now. So I think I'll do validation first, just to get that out of the way. So all we need to do here is import z from Zod, and then we'll do, I think the only function we're going to have for now is going to be create. So we're just going to do a post endpoint, so we'll do const create, and that'll be equal to z.object, and that'll have a title, and that'll be z.string, and we'll have a body as well, and that'll be equal to z.string as well. And then what we can do is we can export default, and we'll export create, and then if we add any more stuff, like if we ever needed to do like update, something like that, and we do const update, and then we'll export update down here, and we'll be able to use it for the root, or for the update root. But for now, I'm just going to stick to create, and then, because basically, once you understand how to do a post request with a request body, then you can do an update request, because they work basically the same way. So that should be fine. I think what I'll do next is a controller. I think that makes the most sense. So I'm going to import db. Does this autocomplete? Let me just check something. db. Oh, okay. I think I've done it before where it did autocomplete, but for some reason it didn't that time. But it's fine though, because we have our import mapping, so it's just #utils/db. And I'm going to put the .js because that's I still don't know if you need the .js, but I've had it in the past where it's failed if it doesn't have the .js, so I'm just going to add it just for the sake of, I don't know, just making sure it doesn't fail, but you might not need that. Async function, because we're going to be doing a request to a database, so it needs to be asynchronous. And we'll do index as the first one, and this is basically just going to return all of our to-dos. So we'll do rec res, and we'll do const result, and that'll be equal to await db.execute, and then we can pass in a string here, which will be the SQL statement, and that's just going to be select all from to-dos. And we'll add a little script in a second, which will actually create the to-dos table. But we'll do that kind of last, and then we'll kind of test through our API and make sure everything's working. So status 200, and then we'll return JSON, and that'll be equal to to-dos, and then it'll be result.rows. There we go. And we'll add another one. So async function, and we'll call this store. So this will be where we actually store our to-do, effectively the post request. And we'll do rec res, and we'll do const result equals to await db.execute, and we'll do an object here, and the first thing in the object will be SQL. So this will be our query. So we'll do insert into to-dos title, body, and completed. So we haven't actually created this table yet, but those are going to be the columns effectively. So title, body, and completed, and the values. And then we'll do question mark, and question mark. So you can do, I forgot what they're called. I think they call them like named parameters. So like, let's say for title, we did something like this. Title. So you can do that, which is probably more convenient, and I might actually do that later, but for now I'm just going to do the question marks. Like I might do that if I kind of build on this API, that might be a thing that I use, but for now we'll just go with, I don't know what they call them actually. Like when you use a question mark, they call it something, like something parameters. I don't know, unnamed parameters, something like that. So we'll go with that for now, and we'll do args, and then we'll do an array. And it'll basically fill in these question marks in order. So the first one will be title. So we'll do rec.body.title. I could probably do this a nicer way and just get like, use deconstructing. Is that what they call it for objects as well? Deconstruct the objects. So, but yeah, basically you would do like const. I think it would be something like this. So title, body, equals to, and then rec.body, something like that. So destructuring. So that's probably the nicer way of writing it. I'm just going to do it this way. It's fine. Rec.body.body, and then a 0, just to mark that it's not actually being completed. So 0 not completed and 1 completed. And then we should be able to just return res.status 201 to indicate that it's been created successfully. And then JSON, and I will pass in message, and it'll just be to do, oh, sorry, it needs to be a message. To do created. I was thinking of like accessing the to do, because when it gets to this bit here, you know, when what you return from the post request where you create a resource, I'm never really sure whether you should return a message saying like, you know, like we're doing here, to do created. Why not keep saying to do dot? Just to do created. I'm thinking of to do as like it's always an object, to do created, no matter what, even if it's in a string, it's still an object, to do created. But yeah, anyway, I don't know. I never know whether you should return a string or like the object itself. So like, for example, I could just return like result dot, what would it be, rows, something like that. So I effectively have returned the to-do that's getting created, or that's being created. I've seen conflicting things on this, so I just tend to return a message saying to-do created. I don't know if that's the right way. Maybe you could return the ID of the to-do. That might make more sense. But I'll leave it for now, but that's kind of up to you, I suppose. Maybe it depends on like the context. Maybe you need the ID. Maybe it makes sense to return a message. Maybe it makes sense to return the entire object. I guess that's down to you, but I've seen conflicting things on that, so I don't really know. But anyway, we won't worry about it too much for now. So we'll export default index and store, and then obviously if you add more methods later on, make sure you export them as well. And then we'll do the roots file, which should be one of the last things we actually have to do, which is good. So we'll import router from Express. We need to import the to-do controller, so we'll just do to-do controller. This is where things get a little bit annoying, because it's giving me autocomplete here and it's doing /controller. So yeah, where it gets a little bit sort of confusing here is the fact that we've added these import maps to make things a bit simpler. So we just need to do #resource/ and then we would do in our roots file, we would actually do also, by the way, that didn't add a .js at the end, so maybe we don't need the .js. I think that's what I'm learning here. But anyway, if we do like the import mapping, we do resources / to-do to-do.controller.js, something like that, which is obviously longer than /to-do controller.js, or even just to-do controller. So this is where it gets a bit weird, because obviously we've added these import mappings for convenience so that we don't have to write really long imports. However, /to-do controller is shorter. So it's a bit sort of contradictory. But what I will say is, and obviously it's down to you what you use. If you want to just do /controller, it is more convenient. My argument would be keeping it the same throughout the code base. So if we needed to, let's say we did another resource that actually had to use, I don't know, I don't think it ever would use that, so maybe this isn't a good example, but if it had to use something from the to-do controller, then it would always be #resources / to-do controller, if that makes sense. So it's just about consistency. So everywhere we import a resource, we use this. So it just keeps it consistent, and we know, we know when we see this, we're using a resource from, or we're using something from the resources folder. So that's my argument. Even though this is longer than just doing /to-do controller, it'll be consistent throughout the code base, and we will know when we see this, we're using something from the resources folder. But it's up to you, ultimately. You can do what you want, and obviously, like I say, it is more convenient just to do /controller, and if you want to do that, that's fine. It's probably a pretty good point, really, because we're not really going to be using this controller anywhere else besides the roots file. So doing /to-do.controller actually is probably a lot more convenient, and we're probably not going to use any of these things anywhere else except the roots file, which we are going to use in index.js. So that's the only one that's maybe an exception to that. But either way, it's up to you. Whatever you want to do. And I'm not the foremost expert on this kind of stuff. So, you can sort of experiment and see what works. We can import validate from middleware. I'm just thinking, because the thing is, this is what I normally do. So I usually do this. Hang on. Should I give it a capital? Validation middleware? Something like that. So I normally do that. And then what I do is I will import validate from, and then I'll do #resources / to-do / to-do.validation.js. And then we can do validate.create. So that makes more sense to me. So we effectively do validation middleware, and then inside of it we do validate.create. So that's usually how I write it. The only reason why I bring that up is because we've called this function validate, so it makes sense, and it would actually make a lot of sense to just bring this in as this validate and then passing that. But I don't really know what you would call this then if that's the case. Like this validate here makes sense because it's validate, create, validate, update, validate, whatever other endpoints you need. So yeah, so it makes sense to call it validate to me, but then obviously you've got the validation middleware, so I guess call this, obviously you can call it whatever you want, but I'm going to call it validation middleware and then pass in validate.create and validate.update. That makes sense to me, but I think if you come up with a better naming convention, then let me know. I am open to ideas on that one. But we'll do const router. So what we're doing now is creating a subrouter, effectively. So in our index.js file, we created our main router, which is this, which is effectively our main application. And then we applied these two middleware to our main application. What we're doing now is creating a subrouter that is specifically for to-dos. And that means that we can apply our own validation. And we're not actually going to do that in this case. Oh, wait, well, not validation, sorry, middleware. There we go. We're not really going to add a middleware, besides we're going to be adding on each individual route, which you could do anyway. But what you could do with this subrouter is add, let's say you added authentication. So you did like app.use, oh, why does it call it, why is it doing that? App.use authentication, sorry. Authenticate, let's call it authenticate. So this middleware, we've got this authenticate middleware, just pretend, would apply to all the to-do routes. So if we did like app.get, it would apply to that. App.post, it would apply to that. But it wouldn't apply to, let's say if we did an app.get here. .get here. Because this app.get is on the main router, and these app.get and this app.post is on this subrouter, which has authenticate applied to it. So that's a way of kind of separating out groups, I suppose, groups of endpoints. So in our case, the groups are effectively just the resources. So if we had if we had product resource, we would do the same thing, and we might add a different middleware for those routes. And we don't necessarily want middleware that we apply to those routes to apply to our to-do routes or our main routes in index. So yeah, that's what we're doing there. We're just creating a subrouter, and eventually we will connect this subrouter up to the main router. And then when we call app.listen, when we run this index file, effectively, it will register our subrouter and all the routes that go with that. So we'll gain access to our to-do routes, which is good. So let's finish this off. We need app.get, and this is going to be /todos, and it'll be to-do. I gave it a lowercase, didn't I? I don't really have a well thought out naming convention here, but when I import something, I usually give it a capital. What is that, Pascal case or not camel case? I don't think. I think it might be Pascal case. Let me have a look. Pascal case. Yeah, there we go. Look at that. It's quite an easy example. So yeah, I'm using Pascal case when I import stuff. So to-do controller and validation middleware and validate as well. I'll do that. So to-do controller.index, and that should be fine. That should be our get endpoint. And then we basically do the same thing, but with a post request, so /todos. And then we need our middleware, so we'll do validation middleware. And we'll pass in validate dot create. And then we'll do to-do controller dot store. Spelt correctly. And then we'll export the router. export router, export default router. And then in index.js, we need to import this. So I'm going to do these imports on, because we're going to have a few of these. If we grow our API, we're going to have a few of these imports. So I'm going to kind of group them together just to be a bit neater. So what we need to do is do import to-dos from, and then we'll do hashtag resources, to-dos, and then to-do.roots.node.js. And this is another good thing about having the resource mapping, is that you always know kind of how to import something no matter where you are in the code base. So I don't need to do like /source/to-do. Like I don't have to figure it out. I just do hashtag resources, and then I know that I'm effectively in this folder here. So I can do /to-dos and then to-do roots.js. And then what we need to do is register these routes, and we need to register them after these two middlewares. And basically any global middleware we need to add needs to go up here. And then we register our subrouters down here so that we apply all these global middlewares to them. I think that's how it works with Express. I think it has to be in order. So we'll do app.use, and then we'll do to-dos. And there we go. We've registered our to-do controller, or to-do routes in this case, actually. Then what we want to do is do one more thing, which is create a new file and create a file called migrations.js. And effectively, I don't really have a good way of handling migrations. If you're not familiar with what migrations are, it's how you set up your database. So you would create migrations for like creating new tables. So if you're using SQLite or MySQL or Postgres, you need to define the schema beforehand. And migrations are a good way of managing that. So you would run a migration and it would create the tables for you from the schema you've specified. So what we'll do is we'll import .env so that this file is effectively going to be ran on its own. Like we're just going to run node migrations.js. So we need to make sure we're importing our .env similar to how we're doing it in index.js. So that we have the process.env filled in, I guess, so that we have access to the env values effectively. So we'll do import db from utils. See, that auto-completed, so that's quite convenient. Import db from utils db.js, and then we'll just do await, and then we can do db.execute, and we'll do create table if not exists to-dos, and then we'll say ID, and that's going to be an integer primary key auto increment. I think that's right. Yep. And then we'll do title, and that's going to be text. Body, and that's going to be text as well. And then completed, which is going to be an integer. And that should, when we run this, if to-dos doesn't exist, it should create that table for us. So let's run this. Like I say, you run it. Oh, what's gone wrong here? Resources to-dos. Yeah, okay. It's because I called it to-dos and not to-do. Let me just check that that's fine. I think I might have done that a few times actually. To-do.roots.js is not defined in package. Oh, it's because I put resource and not resources, I think. Oh, and then, yeah, okay. Yeah, so it needs to be router.get and router.post, not app. All right, and it's created local DB, which I don't know why it's done that. I think it's ran through like something that's kind of created. I think it's this. I think when you import this, it basically creates this local DB file, so that's fine, and it's empty, so we haven't actually done anything yet. So that's fine. Yeah, I'm just going to stop this server. And I was just wondering, because it turned up, this local.db just kind of appeared, and I thought, has it ran the migration for some reason? But no, I don't think it did. It just created it because I think because we're importing this into another file, and it kind of ran that file in a sense. It created the DB based on what we've put in here, this database URL. So it created local.db, which is good. That's fine. So we can run migrations.js, and that should put something in here, which is good. And we don't actually know if that's working yet. What I will do is I'm going to send a request to the post endpoint first, and then we will send a request to the get endpoint last, and we should hopefully see our to-dos. So if we do localhost 8000/to-dos, and we put in the body, it's going to be JSON, and we'll write some JSON here. So we'll do, we need title and body, so we'll do title, and that's going to be like test to do, and we need body, and then we'll just put like, this is my to do. I got to do stuff, so we'll send that and see if that works. I think couldn't connect to server. Yeah, that's because I didn't start it up again. npm run dev. I'm listening. I'm just going to check something quickly. Did I, let me just check validation. Oh, not the validation middleware. Do I need? I don't think I think that's fine. Okay. Sometimes you get caught out by not, I think I'm thinking of something I did before where I didn't do res. I basically didn't return a response. And if you don't do that, Express will just it'll just kind of wait until you return a response, but obviously you haven't put that in. So when I'm running this here, it just doesn't do anything, but that's not actually, it's fine because I've included res.status and JSON here and in here as well. So we should always get a response, which is good. So let me open this again and try again, and we should have failure when receiving data from the peer. Wow. Never seen that before. Syntax error. Okay. Whereabouts is this near value? Okay. Let me just check with my, oh, okay. It's values. Why? That's happened like, that's happened several times now where I've done singular instead of plural, or plural instead of singular. Right, let's try it again. And that should be fine. Yay, to do created. Okay. So now what we should be able to do is just change this to a get. And we should get to-dos. There we go. So there's one more thing I want to test. If we go back to post and we get rid of body, we should get an error. There we go, body required. So it's got an array of strings, body required. If I got rid of that, it should say title and body required. So that's good, validation's working. If we put these back, and I don't think I really need to do an example of this, but if I did another thing like role, and then admin, let's say we were creating a user, and a malicious user tried to pass in the role manually, so that when we created the user, it would create a user with the role of admin. What our validation will do is get rid of this role. So actually, we could probably do, if I do this, console.log validated, we should see, I send that request again. Yes, we should see validated, and it gives us this object, and it doesn't have role in it. So it's basically stripped out any unknown values, which is good, because it means that what we can do is we can put this straight into the database effectively, because we've verified that there's the values that we've got are the ones we are expecting to get. And if we're getting stuff that we're not expecting, it'll either return an error if it's missing something that we need, or it will just strip out that value. You can change the options to not strip out values, but I think it's better that you do strip out the values, and then you can be more confident in using the the return from this parse function, the returned object, and you can use it sort of like, you can basically put it straight into the database without really worrying. Obviously, if you're doing it sort of the way I'm doing it here, like kind of manually, then it's sort of, you don't really have to worry about it anyway because you're doing it manually, but it's fine. But you could just put it straight in and not have to worry because you've kind of handled that on the validation middleware. So something to bear in mind. It's just quite a convenient thing. But yeah, anyway, that's about it really. That's everything you need. Yeah, we've got, so basically from this point onwards, you would just create new folders in here. So like products or product. And then obviously you would create these 3 files and fill them in, and then you've got a product endpoint. So really straightforward. Hopefully that was useful. If it was, make sure you leave a like, subscribe, and I will see you guys next time. Goodbye.